Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Murmurs, where dreams melt into shadows and stories float through your sleep, videos to fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying. Tonight's tale, The Attic Never Sleeps. Let's begin. They said the house was too old to be safe, that the beams would creak and the dust would breathe like something alive. But Marcus didn't listen because it was all he had left after the passing of his grandmother. And when he turned the key in the rusted door and stepped inside, it felt less like entering a house and more like stepping into someone's forgotten dream, where the air hummed softly with silence and the wallpaper curled away from the corners as if retreating from something unsaid, something waiting. The house hadn't been lived in for nearly 15 years, yet nothing felt empty. The furniture was still there beneath white sheets that moved faintly in the drafts, like sleeping ghosts, and the portrait still stared down from the walls with eyes that seemed too focused for paint and canvas. Marcus left his suitcase in the hall and wandered the ground floor slowly, not because he was curious, but because it felt wrong to go too fast, as though the house itself needed to reintroduce each room with careful patience. And when he reached the base of the staircase, he looked up and saw the attic door half open at the very top, a shadow slipping behind it, soft and soundless. He told himself it was nothing, maybe wind, maybe memory, and decided he'd deal with the attic later, maybe seal it shut and forget it existed altogether. But that night, as he lay on the antique bed that groaned like it remembered 1,000 other sleepers, he heard the first sound, a slow dragging across the ceiling, soft like fingers trailing across old floorboards, like something pacing back and forth above his head with no urgency, as though it knew he wasn't going anywhere. He sat up and listened, heart ticking like an old clock, the kind you never quite trust, and told himself it was rats or squirrels, or maybe just the house settling, though he didn't quite believe it. And the next morning, when he pulled down the attic stairs and looked up into the gloom, he saw nothing but dust dancing in the slanted light, boxes stacked like forgotten stories, and a rocking chair in the far corner, tilted ever so slightly as if it had just been left. Still, he told himself it was all in his mind. He hadn't slept well. The house was strange. The attic had always been creepy. But that evening, as the shadows thickened and the house cooled, he lit a single candle and sat on the edge of the bed, listening again, and the pacing returned, slower this time, like something measuring each step with care, like someone who had all the time in the world. He called out, "Hello?" Though he wasn't sure who he expected to answer, and for a long moment the sound stopped altogether, the house holding its breath, and then a soft knock, not from the door but directly above his head, from the floor of the attic. Just one knock, gentle but deliberate, and then silence again. He wanted to leave, of course he did, but something inside him whispered, "Stay." Not in words, but in feeling. The way you feel when a song you don't remember hums its way into your bones. And so he stayed another night, and the sounds returned. The pacing, the soft creaks, the faint dragging. And once he could swear he heard breathing, not his own, not close, but just loud enough to be real. On the third day, he climbed into the attic with a flashlight, holding it like a shield, the beam cutting through the thick dust and catching on old trunks, yellowed books, and that same rocking chair, which this time was gently rocking back and forth, though there was no wind, no reason, nothing visible to touch it. He stood frozen, watching the chair move in that steady rhythm, and then it stopped, not slowly but all at once, like something had been watching him too, and decided the game was over. There were no signs of rodents, no droppings, no nests, no chewed corners, nothing but strange old items. A dollhouse missing its roof, a cracked mirror with something smeared on it that looked like fingerprints, and an old dust-covered phonograph with a record still on the spindle, though the needle was snapped in two. When he tried to lift the trunk nearest the rocking chair, he found it locked, but etched into the side was something faint, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. A single sentence scratched over and over again in a child's careful hand. The attic never sleeps. That night he dreamed of footsteps, not just above him, but all around, like the house had grown hollow and someone was walking its insides, looking for something, or someone. And when he woke, the candle had gone out, though he hadn't touched it, and there was a trail of dust on the floor that led from the attic stairs to the side of his bed, and ended there. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke with the covers pulled to his chin and his hands folded over his chest like someone had tucked him in. And when he opened his eyes, he was certain, absolutely certain, that the rocking chair upstairs had stopped in a different position than he left it. But what unsettled him more was the smell, faint but present, not of rot, not of dust, but of lavender and old perfume, the kind his grandmother used to wear, the kind that lingered long after she had walked away. And yet it was strongest at the base of the attic stairs, like something had stood there for a long time, watching. The next morning, Marcus didn't say anything about the footsteps or the smell, not even to himself, as if voicing it would make it more real. And instead, he made tea in the chipped porcelain cup his grandmother once used, its handle glued back on years ago by a trembling hand. And as the steam curled upwards, he sat by the window and watched the wind stir the garden. The roses all turned to face the attic window, as though listening to something he couldn't hear. He told himself he needed to stay busy, to ground himself. So he spent the afternoon going through boxes in the parlor, finding old letters sealed in yellowed envelopes, photographs with faces half faded, and a single diary written in a careful, looping hand that didn't belong to his grandmother. In fact, the name inside the cover wasn't hers at all, but someone called Eleanor. No last name, no date, just to the one who listens. The pages were filled with soft, strange entries, not quite dreams, not quite memories. Notes about the attic's whispers, how the house shifted when it thought you weren't watching, how she felt something was waiting behind the wooden walls for someone who understood silence better than words. And Marcus felt an odd familiarity with the way she wrote, as if her thoughts echoed his own, as if the attic had spoken to her too. One entry stood out. I saw her again tonight, in the mirror at the end of the attic. She doesn't blink, she just waits. The rocking chair rocks when I cry. He read it twice, then closed the diary, heartbeat slow but heavy, and looked toward the ceiling where faint creaks tapped in an almost rhythmic pattern, not random like before, but steady. 4 steps, pause, then 3, like a loop repeating itself. That night he didn't go to bed early. Instead, he sat in the hallway under the attic stairs, a candle beside him and the diary in his lap, listening. The house around him impossibly still. The kind of silence that felt chosen, not natural. And when the first creak came, he didn't flinch. He just waited, candle flickering in the draftless air. The steps began again, the same pattern, 4 and then 3, like something remembering a dance from a time long gone. And then the attic stairs shifted slightly, not falling, not moving, just breathing, like something above had leaned forward ever so slightly, curious. He whispered, "What do you want?" and instantly regretted it, because a moment later, something responded, not in words but in sound, a soft thud, deliberate and slow, like a hand placed gently against the attic door. He climbed up with shaking knees, flashlight in one hand and the diary in the other, and as he pushed the attic door open, the air changed, colder, heavier, as though the space had waited for his arrival. And the flashlight caught the mirror Eleanor had written about, propped in the far end of the attic against the wall, its glass cloudy, yet faintly glowing as if it remembered faces. He stepped toward it slowly, dust swirling around his feet, and as he neared, the air grew stiller, the silence pressing against his ears until even his own breath felt too loud. And when he reached the mirror, he saw himself, and behind him, just over his shoulder, a tall figure standing completely still, its face lost in shadow, its arms long and unmoving. He spun around, but there was nothing, just boxes and silence. And when he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, but the rocking chair behind him now faced the mirror directly and was gently, very gently, rocking again. He whispered, "Eleanor," unsure why he said it, but the moment the name left his lips, the attic let out a soft sigh, like an exhale from something long asleep and only now stirring. And then the candle in his hand flickered out on its own, though there was no wind, no breath, no reason. He stumbled back down and shut the attic door hard, pushing the stairs up without looking, and sat on the floor, heart racing, until morning bled through the curtains like weak tea through cloth, and the sounds from above stopped altogether, replaced by something worse. Silence that felt full, like the calm before a storm that remembered your name. That day Marcus did not go back up, nor did he sleep. Instead, he opened more of Eleanor's diary, finding strange pages where the ink trailed off mid-sentence, where entire entries were written backward or in symbols he didn't recognize. And once a passage that read simply, "I tried to leave, but she followed me in the walls. She whispers my name when I sleep. She wants me to stay." The house grew colder with each passing night, not from weather but from something else, something within. And he began noticing the way his belongings would move slightly when he wasn't watching. A cup shifted an inch, a book fell open to pages he hadn't reached, and once a single lock of white hair was found on his pillow, though his own was still dark. He placed the diary in the kitchen drawer and tried to forget it, tried to tell himself none of this was real, that maybe he needed rest, maybe the house had simply gotten to him. But as the sun set and the light left the corners of the home, he heard something entirely new. Laughter, faint and wrong, coming not from above, but from inside the walls. He pressed his ear to the wooden paneling in the hallway and listened, and what he heard froze him still. A voice, whispering so softly it was barely breath, saying, "You're the last, Marcus. Don't leave me here alone again." He backed away slowly, and that night, the mirror in the attic reflected not just shadows, but the flickering image of a girl in an old dress sitting in the rocking chair, her head tilted, smiling slightly, as if she had waited too long and was no longer patient. When he tried to photograph the attic the next morning, his phone wouldn't turn on, and the old camera he found in a drawer had its film already exposed, every image faintly showing a tall shape beside him, always just slightly out of frame. Marcus didn't know how much longer he could stay, but the idea of leaving filled him with dread, not freedom, because the attic had begun whispering his name now, not just at night, but during the day, softly, lovingly, like a lullaby from something that no longer remembered what silence was. As Sarah stepped deeper into the attic, each creaking floorboard beneath her feet seemed to echo with voices too low to hear, but too ancient to ignore. And as the dusty beams overhead groaned under the weight of silence, she felt an invisible current pulling her not toward the old trunks or broken furniture, but toward a shadowed corner veiled by an old curtain that swayed without wind. And when she lifted the fabric, she found behind it a tiny wooden door, no taller than her knees, etched with symbols she couldn't recognize, and stained dark as if it had bled long ago. And though her instincts told her to back away, the air around her seemed to still, and something, held her gaze locked onto that little door like a spell. So with trembling fingers, she reached forward and gently pushed, expecting resistance, but finding instead an almost willing surrender. As the door creaked open to reveal a cramped tunnel sloping downwards, lit by a faint amber glow, as if candles had just been extinguished moments before, and the scent that wafted out was a blend of old earth, something floral, and something rotting, yet familiar. And before she could decide to turn back, she heard the softest whisper not behind her, but inside her, like her thoughts had suddenly grown their own voice. "You've been here before." And though every part of her body tensed, her feet stepped inside of their own accord, crawling through the passage that seemed far too long for such a small door, until it opened into a narrow domed room lined with shelves, not of books but of glass jars, each containing things that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Strands of hair, old spectacles, dusty rings, and what looked unmistakably like baby shoes soaked in something dark. And just as her breath caught in her throat, she heard a soft lullaby playing from an old gramophone in the corner. But it played backwards and slowly, and the tune seemed to tug at her memory, reminding her of something she couldn't place. Something from before she'd ever come to this town, maybe even before she was born. And on the far end of the room stood a mirror covered in a black cloth, and written in chalk beneath it on the wall was the phrase, "Once seen, never slept." And her fingers, without thought, reached for the cloth as the air turned colder, her breath now visible. And the moment the mirror was revealed, she didn't see her reflection. She saw the attic, this attic from behind her. And in the reflection, standing where she had just stood, was a tall, thin man with no face, only a mouth that smiled, impossibly wide, and whispered again, "You've been here before." As Sarah stared into the mirror, frozen by the image of the faceless man whose smile seemed stitched into his skin like it was never meant to move but always meant to haunt, she tried to look away, but the reflection clung to her gaze like a second shadow, and though her head turned slowly to confirm the attic behind her was empty, her reflection told another truth. In the mirror, the man still stood there, motionless, his grin growing wider, his neck twitching slightly like he was trying to speak but had forgotten how. And then, in a sudden breathless flicker, the mirror turned black, swallowing its own light, and from within it came a sound, not loud, not sharp, but soft, like nails tapping gently on wood. Tap, 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 in a rhythm too deliberate to be random. And as the sound faded, the gramophone stopped playing, and for the first time since she entered the passage, Sarah realized her heart was pounding in perfect sync with that tapping, as if the attic had learned her rhythm and was now playing it back to her, distorted and slow. And just then the jars on the shelves began to tremble, gently at first as though a wind had passed through, but then violently, rattling and clinking until one fell and shattered, and out of it spilled not liquid, but hair, long strands of jet black hair that coiled on the floor like it was alive, crawling toward her feet before shriveling into ash. And somewhere above, from the attic she'd left behind, she heard footsteps, slow, dragging, steady, circling the floorboards above her, and with every pass, dust rained gently from the cracks in the ceiling, whispering down like soft snow. And she knew whatever was walking above wasn't looking for her. It already knew where she was, and it was waiting for her to come back up, or maybe just waiting for her to forget which way was out. Because when she turned to crawl back through the little wooden tunnel, it was gone, replaced by a solid wall covered in peeling wallpaper, the same floral pattern that lined the hallway in her grandmother's house years ago, a house that had burned down when she was 7, a memory she hadn't thought about in decades, and now somehow it wrapped around her again like a cocoon of forgotten time. And the air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of old perfume and something faintly metallic. And from behind the wallpaper came a sound. Not footsteps this time, but breathing, slow and shallow, like someone was standing right behind the wall, with their mouth pressed against it, watching her through it. And just when she took a step back, a soft bulge began to rise from the surface, as if fingers were pressing through from the other side, one by one, stretching the paper until a fingernail tore through, stained yellow and chipped, followed by another. And then she ran, not because she was brave, but because something deep inside her finally screamed loud enough to move, and she bolted past the shelves, past the mirror now flickering with static like a broken screen, into a deeper corridor lit only by the faintest flicker of candlelight. And in the shadows ahead, she saw a staircase spiraling upward, carved out of old wood and bone-white stone. The steps too narrow, the walls too tight, and yet she climbed, each step groaning under her weight as if warning her to turn back. But above her, she heard it. Not a voice, but a lullaby. This time played correctly, sweet and slow and painfully familiar. And with each step she realized it was her mother's voice, singing the same tune she used to hum when Sarah was a child. Only her mother had never been here, had never even seen this attic. So how did the attic know the sound of her lullaby? As Sarah climbed higher into the spiraling passage, the melody grew louder, clearer, until it was no longer just a lullaby, but a voice gently calling her name, soft and distant, like someone dreaming her into the dark. "Sarah, come home," the voice echoed, and with every step she took, the walls began to change, the stone giving way to aged wooden panels lined with hundreds of tiny carvings, symbols, eyes, moths, keys, all etched as if someone had been carving secrets into the very bones of the attic for centuries. And then, without warning, the stairs ended in front of a narrow door painted in deep, dark red. Not blood red, but older, faded, like rusted memories pressed into paint, and carved into its surface was a phrase she didn't remember knowing, but somehow understood. "We remember what you forget." And as her fingers brushed the handle, it turned cold, pulsing like something alive, and the door creaked open slowly, revealing a small room lit only by candles. Hundreds of them, each burning low, wax pooled in strange shapes like faces melting into the floor, and in the center stood a cradle, old and wooden, slowly rocking by itself. Creak, creak, creak. And as she stepped closer, Sarah's breath caught. Inside was a bundle wrapped in cloth, moving gently, rising and falling with breath. And from beneath the cloth came the sound of a child softly giggling, not crying, not afraid, but playful, like it had been waiting for her. And as her hand reached toward it, the cloth unraveled on its own to reveal nothing, just air, empty and still. And yet the giggle remained, echoing around the room, circling her, becoming dozens of voices, some small, some not, all laughing in tones that slowly warped into something hollow and cold. And the candles flickered violently, throwing shadows against the walls that didn't match her movement. They danced independently, acting out scenes she didn't want to understand. A girl climbing stairs, a figure behind her, a door closing, a scream, silence. And then the floor beneath the cradle split open with a slow groan, revealing a hatch that hadn't been there before, and beneath it, a staircase that led downward into darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the candlelight. And from below came that soft tapping again. Tap, 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 in the same rhythm as her heartbeat. And though her body screamed to run, her legs moved forward like she'd done this before, like her story was playing out in loops she couldn't escape. And as she descended into the earth, the walls around her breathed, not figuratively, but truly, inhaling and exhaling in long, slow waves, as if the house itself was alive, waiting, listening. And she whispered, "What do you want from me?" But the attic answered in its own language, a windless whisper through the walls, the soft clatter of teeth against wood, the sound of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. And at the bottom of the steps, she found herself in a room made of mirrors. But not her reflection. No. These mirrors showed other versions of her, younger, older, crying, screaming, sleeping, burning. In each reflection, something was slightly off. Her eyes too dark, her mouth stitched, her hands backwards, and they all turned to look at her at once, their heads tilting in perfect unison, their eyes wide and cold. And then one by one they began to smile, wide and slow and unnatural. And behind her, she felt it, not seen, but sensed, the presence she had forgotten to remember, the one that waited in the walls. And when she turned, the mirrors shattered all at once in deafening silence, shards flying past her face but never touching her. And in their place stood the outline of a figure, tall, thin, faceless, but not featureless, because its form shifted like smoke, bending into shapes that reminded her of nightmares she had long buried. And it spoke not with sound, but with thought, pressing into her mind like fingers curling into soft earth. You left us, but we never left you. And as her knees gave way and she fell to the floor, the attic whispered its name to her, not in words but in feelings: abandonment, guilt, return, debt. And she understood then that this attic didn't belong to any one house. It was a memory made real, a prison for forgotten pain, and she had come back not by accident, but by invitation. And the invitation had always been in her blood, passed down, remembered, whispered in dreams she thought were just dreams. As Sarah knelt on the cold wooden floor, the shifting figure of smoke before her grew still, watching her not with eyes but with memory itself. And she realized that it wasn't just a presence. It was a collection of every emotion ever buried in the silence of forgotten rooms. Every scream muffled under floorboards, every tear soaked into the beams of an old house left to rot. And it began to show her things, not with visions, but by pulling them out of her chest, making her feel what had been locked away. She was 5 again, standing at the edge of the attic staircase in her childhood home, staring into the darkness she had always been told not to enter. But that day she had climbed, drawn by a whisper she thought was her own voice. And at the top, she had found a mirror, tall and cracked. And in its reflection, she saw herself waving even though she wasn't moving. And then the mirror shattered and the memory went dark. And she was older now, 16, hiding in the attic after an argument, heartbroken and silent. And she remembered whispering into the shadows, "I wish I could disappear." And something had whispered back, "We hear you." And after that night, things had changed. She'd forgotten the attic, like it had been erased, until the day the letter came, summoning her back to the house after her grandmother's death. And now, in this place beneath the attic, those forgotten moments returned one by one, each memory attaching itself to the walls like roots, growing in reverse. And the voice in the dark whispered, "You were born here, not in this attic, but in the space it guards." And Sarah's breath caught as she realized this place wasn't under the attic. It was the attic, a shifting realm that existed within her bloodline, passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, and only one could carry it at a time, the others becoming part of the structure, the house that dreamed. And now it was her turn, and she cried out, "Why me?" But the answer came not in words, but in a feeling so deep it pressed into her spine. Because you heard the whispers, you believed them, you followed them, and that made you ours. And then the walls shifted and she saw portraits, dusty, ancient, covering the walls in a room that hadn't been there before. Each one painted in deep, dark oil strokes, each of a woman with familiar eyes, all of them looking just slightly like her. And beneath each painting was a name: Alice, Miriam, Evelyn, Claire, Margaret, Sarah. The last frame was empty, waiting, the paint still wet. And in that moment she understood that this attic was not a place but a passage, a tether between the forgotten and the waking. And her family had always guarded it, each one consumed when the time came, their memories absorbed, their stories stitched into the wood and air. And now it was calling her to join them, not in death, but in becoming. And the air around her pulsed with ancient breath, the heartbeat of the house growing louder as the smoky figure stepped forward, reaching toward her with a hand that wasn't solid but heavy with presence. And as its fingers hovered above her chest, the attic itself began to tremble, not violently, but rhythmically, like a heart preparing to stop and restart. And the moment the figure touched her, Sarah saw everything, all time layered at once, all versions of herself screaming, sleeping, silent. And then she was standing outside her own body, watching the attic shift around her. And for a moment, she was nothing but thought, memory, echo, and the attic welcomed her like an old friend returning home. And as her breath slowed, she felt herself sinking, not into death, but into the architecture, into the beams and the breath between the walls, her name slowly becoming part of the house's long whisper. And just before everything went quiet, she heard one last voice, that of her grandmother, soft and proud, whispering from the candlelight, "You remembered, and now you're never alone." and the attic sighed as if finally at rest. But deep within its shadows, the floorboards creaked, and the door to the stairs cracked open, as if waiting for someone else to return, to listen, to forget and remember once more. Sarah's breath returned like a slow wave, gentle but wrong, as if inhaling not air, but memory itself. And when she opened her eyes, she was no longer kneeling in the attic, but standing in a hallway that didn't belong to any house she remembered. The walls were shifting subtly, breathing in and out like the ribs of something living, and the light was not from any candle or bulb. It came from behind the wallpaper, a dull amber glow that pulsed with each step she took. And though her hands were cold, the doorknobs she touched were warm, as if freshly held by invisible hands. And as she turned one, the door didn't open into a room, but into another hallway, longer and dimmer, filled with paintings of people with blurred faces. And she realized they were not strangers. They were memories she didn't remember having, moments that didn't belong to her, but somehow lived in her bones. And from behind her, soft music began to play, an old piano tune, slow and sorrowful, like someone remembering love after forgetting the name of the one they loved. And she followed the sound because it felt familiar, felt like something that had always been hers. And the hallway bent again, looping unnaturally, like the house was folding in on itself. And as she walked, she saw symbols on the walls, not painted, but stitched into the wallpaper with thread, like veins sewn into skin, each one glowing faintly as she passed. And the floor beneath her feet creaked a word she couldn't quite make out, over and over, as if the house itself was trying to tell her something. And when she reached the room at the end, she found a chair facing the wall, rocking gently though no one sat in it. And on the wall above it was a mirror covered with black cloth, the same cloth from her grandmother's attic. And she remembered being told never to touch it, not as a child, not even after the funeral. But now it was here, and the cloth was twitching, as if something beneath it was breathing, and against every instinct she had, she reached out, her fingers trembling, not with fear but recognition, and she pulled the cloth away, and the mirror revealed not her reflection, but the attic again, dark and still, and in the mirror's center, a version of herself sat curled in the rocking chair, eyes closed, lips moving slowly, whispering something over and over. And Sarah leaned closer, straining to hear, and the words came faint and echoing. The attic is not a room. It's a memory that waits. And then the mirror cracked down the middle, and with it, so did the hallway behind her, splitting like old bark, and the walls moaned as if in mourning, and the glow vanished, and she was falling, not through air, but through years, through generations, through dreams forgotten by the living and remembered only by the house. And when she landed, she was back in the attic, the real one, or what passed for real, the candlelight flickering again, the chair gone, but the air full of whispers now, not just one voice, but many, layered and low, saying her name not as a call, but as a memory being rehearsed. And the attic door creaked open by itself, revealing not stairs, but a long tunnel lined with mirrors on each side, all of them showing different versions of Sarah. Some older, some younger, some not even human. Just outlines of light shaped like her sadness. And she walked slowly, each mirror whispering something different. Do you remember when you forgot? Do you know what you left behind? This is where endings begin. And she reached the final mirror where instead of a reflection, she saw her grandmother sitting in a chair, holding a book with no title, smiling faintly, and she said without looking up, "You're almost ready." And the mirror dissolved like fog, revealing a staircase made of shadow leading down, down, endlessly down. And Sarah descended, her footsteps making no sound, her breath no longer hers. And at the bottom, she found the original attic, the first, the source, older than the house, older than names. A space built not of wood, but of memory and sleep. And in its center was a cradle, and in the cradle was her, not a baby, not a body, but a shape made of all her forgotten dreams. And the whispers rose like wind, circling her, calling her not Sarah, but keeper, not girl, but story. And she realized the attic never needed her to stay. It needed her to remember, to carry it forward, to become the whisper for someone else one day. And as the last light faded and the shadows closed in gently, lovingly, the house exhaled and the attic went silent again until the day someone else would hear it breathing in their sleep. And when Sarah woke, she was no longer in the attic, no longer in the house, no longer anywhere she could name. Instead, she stood barefoot in a field of stillness, the sky above her pale with unspoken twilight, and the ground below soft like forgotten lullabies. And around her stood the outlines of houses she had never lived in, but somehow remembered, flickering gently like memories on the edge of sleep. And the wind carried no sound, only silence folded in on itself. The kind of silence that comes just before someone says your name in a dream. And she walked slowly, as though trying not to wake the world beneath her, the earth whispering soft rhythms beneath each step. And in the distance she saw the house, not just her grandmother's, not just the one with the attic, but all of them merged into one impossible shape, a house made of every hallway she had ever walked in fear, every room she had passed while wondering if someone else was still awake, every attic she had been warned never to enter, and she approached it not with fear, but with understanding. And the door opened before she could touch it, opening not with a creak, but with a sigh. And she entered, and everything inside was still, the walls holding their breath, the staircase frozen like a paused heartbeat. And when she reached the top again, the attic door was ajar, the same candle burning beside it, though she had never lit it, and she stepped in, her shadow entering just a moment after her, as if even it was hesitant now, and the attic welcomed her like an old friend, the floor groaning softly beneath her weight, not in protest but in memory. And she saw in the farthest corner the cradle again, still untouched but empty now, and beside it the mirror, unbroken, waiting. And in it she saw not herself but a girl, not her, someone else, someone younger, standing in the hallway of a different house, reaching for an attic door. And in that moment, Sarah understood. The attic wasn't haunted because something lived inside it. It was haunted because it remembered. It remembered all the dreams left unfinished, all the thoughts whispered at midnight and swallowed by morning. It remembered those who came seeking answers and left only questions behind. And now it remembered her, not as a name, not as a face, but as a story. And Sarah sat down in the rocking chair once more, the one that had always been there waiting, and she closed her eyes and listened to the creaking of the wood beneath her, matching the rhythm of her breath. And she whispered not words but silence, the kind of silence that carries across time, through walls and across dreams, until somewhere, in some other town, a child stirs in bed and asks why the ceiling above them feels heavier at night. And a mother says it's just the wind, but the child hears more, hears breathing in the boards above, hears footsteps in the stillness, hears the attic remembering, and Sarah smiles faintly, even in sleep, because she knows now that the attic never sleeps. Not really. It just waits, waits to be remembered, waits to be opened, waits to be told again and again, in dreams and whispers and stories that begin long after midnight and end just before dawn, when the shadows are softest and the world forgets how to be afraid. For a little while,